لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد. My respected elders, brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have gathered here tonight for this weekly Thursday gathering that we have at this venue. And as you all know, 3rd of June coincides with the death anniversary of Ayatollah Imam Ruhullah Khomeini. So it was suggested that we dedicate this session to him. So all of you must have come in with expectations as to what should be discussed, what are you willing to hear about this man. There's plenty of literature out there. For those of you who want to study his biography, where was he born, which family, who were his parents, his childhood, how he started his Hausa studies, his marriage, his children, and of course the highlight being the Iranian Revolution and his death. So this is one way of knowing more about this man. So there's a brief biography written by Hamid Algar, the famous historian or author, very well written. It's there on alislam.org, very informative, it's short, and excellent. So for those of you who want to read it, you can refer to that. There's a detailed one and a very extensive one by Sayyid Ali Qadri, which I came across. And it's very well written. It's been translated from Farsi. And as you know, Farsi is very rich, it's very poetic. So the translation also has been done in the same way. So you have to be very patient because the way it starts, just the introduction is so many pages, and then the biography starts, and very much in detail as to what was his hometown like in Khomeini, and what was his grandfather doing, and what was his father doing, and then his birth, and every detail of his life. So I just browsed through this biography, not in detail, but I intend to go through it because there's a lot of information included in this biography. There's another book on alislam.org. It's called Rays of the Sun. For those of you who might have gone through it, it's called Rays of the Sun, 83 stories from the life of Imam Khomeini. So it's translated again from Farsi into English by the dynamic couple, Abbas and Shaheen Merali of London. And they've done a wonderful job. So small stories, anecdotes from the life of Imam Khomeini. And it makes a good reading. So a few stories, very inspirational stories, and gives you an insight about this man. But allow me to take a slightly different approach. And my apologies if I don't stand up to your expectation. I'm not a historian, I'm not an analyst, but just a slightly different approach. So just to take a flavor, like we are commemorating his death anniversary, Imam Khomeini. So just to take a flavor from things that have been happening this week. So to start off, you've been told to recite 50 verses of the Quran, if possible. Recite 50 verses of the Quran at least. Ulamas tell you that in these 50 verses you will get the message for your day. And it's amazing. So there are people who start the Quran from the beginning and go in sequence, and that's what I try to do. And there are some who just randomly open the Quran, and whichever page they come up with, and just recite 50 verses. And it's amazing how the Quran talks to you. And for those of you who have come to my office, my clinic, there's a screen there, very similar to the one that has been put up in the mosque, whereby you have one verse at a time, which is there for 4 minutes, and then it changes again. done by Ashton. So that's also amazing. You could be talking about something inside the room, or you talk with your patient, or you talk outside on the phone, and the moment you look at the screen, and there's a message in it for you. And that's the miracle of the Holy Quran. So allow me to take inspiration from my sabak in the past 1 week. So I started from the beginning, but I'd reached Surah Araf, chapter 7. And these are the verses that I was reciting. By that time, the topic had been decided. So verse number 59, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لقد أرسلنا نوحا إلى قومه فقال يا قوم اعبدوا الله ما لكم من إله غيره إني أخاف عليكم عذاب يوم عظيم. So it starts with the story of Nabi Nuh. Certainly we sent Nuh to his people, so he said, O my people, serve Allah, you have no God except Him. Surely I fear for you the chastisement of the grievous day. So this is verse number 59. Verse number 65, وَإِلَىٰ عَادٍ أَخَاهُمْ هُودًا قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ. The same verse, the same message of Nabi Nuh. أَفَلَا تَتَّقُونَ. And to Ad, we sent their brother Hud. He said, O my people, serve Allah, you have no God other than Him. Will you not then guard against evil? Verse number 73. So this is, I'm talking about my sabak now, of those 50 verses. وَإِلَىٰ ثَمُودَ أَخَاهُمْ صَالِحًا. So there are verses in between which I'm skipping. قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ. Same phrase again. قد جاءتكم بينة من ربكم هذه ناقة الله لكم آية فذروها تأكل في أرض الله ولا تمسوها بسوء فيأخذكم عذاب أليم. And to Thamud, we sent their brother Salih, أخاهم Salih. Now there are key words here, we'll discuss them. O my people, serve Allah, you have no God other than Him. Clear proof indeed has come to you from your Lord. This is a she-camel. So to Thamud, a she-camel was sent. Therefore, leave her alone to pasture on Allah's earth and do not touch her with any harm, otherwise painful chastisement will overtake you. Verse number 80. وَلُوطًا إِذْ قَالَ لِقَوْمِهِ أَتَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. And we sent Lut when he said to his people, what do you commit an indecency which anyone in the world has not done before you? Then verse number 85. وَإِلَىٰ مَدْيَنَ أَخَاهُمْ شُعَيْبًا قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ. Same phrase again. قَدْ جَاءَتْكُمْ بَيِّنَةٌ مِّنْ رَبِّكُمْ فأوفوا الكيل والميزان ولا تبخسوا الناس أشياءهم ولا تفسدوا في الأرض بعد إصلاحها ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم مؤمنين. So this was a different vice now. So if you notice, every prophet's message is the same, but it's talking about different vices. Lut's vice is different. Shu'aib's vice, it looks like there was fraud at that time. There was a lot of corruption at that time. So he was sent to correct that. So verse number 88. Now I don't want to lose you. The topic is Imam Khomeini. But we'll come to that. I just want to take a flavor from these verses and study this personality based on these verses. So verse number 88, same Surah Araf. قال الملأ الذين استكبروا من قومه لنخرجنك يا شعيب والذين آمنوا معك من قريتنا أو لتعدن في ملتنا قال أولو كنا كارهين. Now see, when Shu'aib came to them, Prophet Shu'aib came to them, this was their reaction. قال الملأ, the elite, the chiefs, the top 1%, they tell him, those who are proud from amongst his people said, we will most certainly turn you out. We are going to kick you out. We are going to send you into exile. Ya Shu'aib. And also those who believe with you from our town, or you shall come back to our faith. He said, woe to those we dislike it. Verse number 94. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا فِي قَرْيَةٍ مِّن نَبِيٍّ إِلَّا أَخَذْنَا أَهْلَهَا بِالْبَأْسَاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَضَّرَّعُونَ. Now this is a general verse. And we did not send a prophet in a town, but we overtook its people with distress and affliction in order that they might humble themselves. So before a prophet came, there was distress in that community to make them desperate to turn back to Allah. And then the prophet came in as a savior. Verse number 103. ثم بعثنا من بعدهم موسى بآياتنا إلى فرعون وملئه فظلموا بها فانظر كيف كان عاقبة المفسدين. So the famous story of Nabi Musa now. After a few verses, Nabi Musa now is discussed. وما تنقم منا إلا أن آمن بآيات ربنا لما جاءتنا ربنا أفرغ علينا صبرا وتوفنا مسلمين. Nabi Musa says, and you do not take revenge on us except because we have believed in the communications of our Lord when they came to us. O Lord, pour out upon us patience and cause us to die in submission. So Nabi Musa is asking for sabr. قال موسى لقومه استعينوا بالله واصبروا. Nabi Musa is telling his people, ask from Allah, ask help from Allah and be patient. Surely the land, إِنَّ الْأَرْضَ لِلَّهِ يُورِثُهَا مَنْ يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Surely the land is Allah's. He causes such of His servants to inherit it as He pleases. And then the end is for those who guard against evil. So a summary of all these verses put together. All these prophets who have been mentioned, and other verses in the Quran which talks about Nabi Ibrahim, Nabi Yusuf. All these personalities were game changers. When they came to their societies, to their respective societies, they changed the status quo. Whatever was happening in that community, within a short time they managed to turn around things. Either there was an adab from Allah, or there was reformation, or they escaped from that land. But they all emerged victorious. So the message is, قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ. Tawheed. What they did was they preached Tawheed. This was a common message for all of them. Now this is in the olden times, and if you see these events for Nabi Nuh, Ad, Thamud, Lut, the times of Nabi Musa, they may have been separated by time. And Allah takes them as an example. But it all looked in separate parts of the world. But come the Renaissance in the 13th century, what happened was it was characterized by three processes. One was the rationalization of scientific research in the place of church. So till that time, church was supreme. Now scientific research became supreme. So it accelerated technological research, one. Number two, democratization. So the monarchy was destroyed and democracy came in. One man, one vote. And the last one was rationalization of trade liberalization. So till then, we had boundaries to cities, to villages, to communities. Now there are no boundaries. The world is your boundary. So as a result, the exploitation now became a global thing. The vices that were happening became global. Initially, in olden times, because of lack of communication or because of the respect of boundaries and monarchies and lack of technology to bring about communication, all these vices may have been restricted to certain areas. But now, with all this happening, from the 13th century to date, with the changes that have happened, no doubt, there are pluses to the technological advances. It has benefited all of us, the way we communicate with each other. But exploitation also has become global now. People sitting in one corner of the world can exploit people sitting in the other end of the world. It's become one global village. The vices, which start off in one place, within a short time, it spreads like wildfire and becomes a problem of another area. So this is just to tell you about the situation that we are in just now, starting from the 80s or 70s to date. Only if we understand the environment around us, what is happening around us, the direction in which the world is going, only then will we appreciate the character and the presence of Imam Khomeini. So this was a flavor of the Quranic verses that I have been reciting as part of my sabak. But there's a book that I just finished, and it's called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. EHMs, they are called. I was supposed to bring the book with me. I forgot. I would have shown it to you. But there's an online PDF copy also, so you can download it. And it's difficult. If you download it, it's not arranged properly, so it's difficult to read. But I read it online, and then I got the book through somebody. So it's a book by John Perkins, who was an economic hitman himself. And there's a TED talk by him also, John Perkins, and he's talking about his book and his profession. He's retired, of course. So he defines who is an economic hitman. Now this again is just to give you an insight as to what is happening around the world. What is the game that is going on just now, to enable us to appreciate Imam Khomeini even better. So he defines the economic hitman. He says an economic hitman, an EHM, they are highly paid professionals who cheat countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars. They funnel money from the World Bank, the US Agency for International Development, USAID, and other foreign aid organizations into the coffers of huge corporations and pockets of a few wealthy families who control the planet's natural resources. Their tools include fraudulent financial reports, so they make financial reports, fraudulent ones. Rigged elections, so they rig elections. They payoffs, they give off payoffs, extortion, sex, murder. They play a game as old as the empire itself, but one that has taken on new and terrifying dimensions during this time of globalization. I should know, he says. I was an EHM myself. This is John Perkins saying. So he defines it and he says, I should know better because I was one of them. So in this book, he talks about his childhood, and his college life, and his marriage, and how he joined the Peace Corps. He joined the Peace Corps and he was sent to South America as a charity. It's a charity organization, so-called charity organization. So youths join it and they're sent to remote places, difficult standards of living, to do some charity work, and they come back. But it's a big qualification. So he joined the Peace Corps. And from there he was recruited to join the security agency. And then he joined Main, M-A-I-N, which is a consultancy agency. So they do consultancy for the World Bank. So their job was to assess whether loans should be given to third world countries. So he joined Main, and his main job was to assess these third world countries. So Indonesia, Ecuador, Panama, Colombia, Iran, these are the countries that he visited. So when he was recruited, so in his TED talk also, he talks about this lady called Claudine Martin. He talks about Claudine Martin, this lady who came and trained him into an economic hitman. She is the one who trained this guy, one-to-one training. So Claudine told me, I quote him, Claudine told me that there are two primary objectives of my work as an economic hitman. First, I was to justify huge international loans that would funnel money back to Maine and other US companies like Bechtel, Halliburton, Stone, and Webster. So this was his first job. The loans that would come out from the World Bank would first go to this agency, like Maine, as part of their payment for consultancy, through massive engineering and construction projects. Second, I would work, he is saying, John Perkins saying, I would work to bankrupt the countries that receive these loans. So he would funnel the loans to these countries. That money would end up in these consultancy companies as construction contracts to Halliburton and them. So that was his first task. Second task is to advise these countries in such a way that they go bankrupt. Secondly, I would work to bankrupt the countries that receive these loans after they had paid Maine and the other US contractors, of course, so that they would be forever beholden to their creditors. And so they would present easy targets when we needed favors, including military bases, UN votes, or access to oil and other natural resources. Now, this is his writing from this book. So he would justify the loan, but at the same time make sure that the country goes bankrupt, so much so that they become vulnerable. And whenever they are needed for a military base or for natural resources, they would give him. So I would suggest all of you should read this book, and we'll understand better as to what is happening in this world of ours. What is happening in Pakistan just now is nothing new. This guy was in the 70s. This book has been written in the 70s. But if you understand this book, you'll understand what is happening in Pakistan just now. It's not rocket science. So he was sent to Indonesia first. His first task was to Indonesia. Indonesia happened to be an oil-rich Muslim nation and a hotbed of communist activity. It was inclining towards communism. So this man was sent to bring them back and do whatever his intention was, as he has described it in his book. So now Claudine is telling him, she's telling John Perkins, it is the next domino after Vietnam. So Indonesia is the next domino. You know what are dominoes, right? You arrange dominoes, one block falls and the other one falls. So Vietnam is the next domino after Vietnam. We must win the Indonesians over. If they join the communist bloc, well, she drew a finger across her throat and then smiled. If they join the economic bloc, then we are done, she's telling John Perkins. Let's say you need to come up with a very optimistic forecast of the economy. How will it mushroom after all the new power plants and distribution plants are made? So just go there and put up a projection that this is what Indonesia is going to be like. After they get the money and all the dams are done and the roads are done, this is how it's going to be. You will be rewarded to justify this for US aid, and the world is your shopping cart. This is Claudine's words to John Perkins. The world is your shopping cart. Next assignment, he goes to Panama. Omar Torrijos was the president, voted by popular vote. So Panama was separated from Colombia. It used to be part of Colombia. It was separated from Colombia. And the Panama Canal was dug. And the ones who separated Panama from Colombia were the Americans themselves. They brought in the army, separated it, and then they put a puppet government. They wanted to be in control of the Panama Canal, which is very important. Omar Torrijos came in, they were not expecting it. And his first condition was, it should be under our authority. The Panama Canal should be under our authority, so that we get benefits from the ships that passed through here. Then his next task. So I'll tell you the fate of Omar Torrijos later on. The Saudi Arabian money laundering scheme. So he was sent to Saudi Arabia now. And see, this is a desert, a useless desert. These Arabs don't want to develop it, but they have a lot of money because of oil. So make sure that this oil comes back to us. To make sure that oil lends back into the US soil through contracts. But the problem was the royal family was very complex. So he talks about this. There was one prince who was very stubborn. So he was given this task. He'd go and convince this prince to give contracts to this US company. So the prince says, I don't mind. I'm interested in blonde women. This is my weakness. So John Perkins arranges for this in the US. And the contract was passed. Contracts came into the US. So oil money being channeled, being funneled back to US companies. And everything from roads to garbage collection in Saudi Arabia was given to American companies. This was the job of this economic hitman. Then he goes to Ecuador. President Jaime Roldos. So there was oil exploration going on, and America wanted that oil. But this man said, no, it should benefit my own people. So Jaime Roldos and Omar Torrijos, both of them died in plane crashes within a gap of 2 months of each other. And this man says it was no coincidence. It was not an accident. Somebody was involved in their killing because they were not following the commands of the master. Now comes the interesting part of this book. Interesting part of this book, he was sent to Iran now. After Saudi Arabia, he is sent to Iran. He says, just like Saudi Arabia, Iran is rich in resources. They have oil. So exactly what we have done to Saudi Arabia, this is what you should do with Iran. So he gets to meet the Shah and the people around. And it was almost happening. The King of Kings is the title of that chapter. And they had big projects planned for Iran, just like Saudi Arabia. But then he was called. He was called secretly by a person who was a close aide to the Shah. But he was caught, not John Perkins, that aide was caught by Shah, tortured, and he managed to go somewhere in the desert into isolation because they had disfigured him totally. Apparently something had happened with the Shah. So this man tried to trace John Perkins and got hold of him. So he goes to meet him somewhere in the middle of the desert. And then this guy warns him that I know you've been very successful. I advise you to leave Iran because we are going to overthrow the Shah. And the mullahs, these are his words, the mullahs are gaining strength, they're becoming more and more popular. So I would advise you to take out your investments as a brother, as a well-wisher. I'm advising you, take your investments out before you lose them. And truly, in 1978, he had to leave in emergency, John Perkins. And the revolution happened, and Imam Khomeini came in, and they lost a lot of investment. His company, Main and Halliburton, and all those investments that were done. So, I don't want to spoil the fun of this book. I've given you bits and pieces just to give you a general idea as to what this book is about. And it's not very thick. You can go through it, it's a good read. But as you see, they were successful in Indonesia. They were successful in Ecuador, they were successful in Panama, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, and so many more places in South America. And initially they were successful in Iran also, overthrowing the popular government of Mossadegh, bringing in the Shah back, and for exploiting Iran for some time. But then the revolution happened. So they were successful in all these places, including Iran. But in Iran, the game changed. And the game changer was Imam Khomeini. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So what was it in Imam Khomeini that foiled their plans? What made him a game changer? The answer is very simple. So let me take you back to the verses that I started with. If you see all those game changers, right from Nabi Nuh and Hud and Salih and Lut and Shu'aib and Nabi Musa and Nabi Ibrahim and Nabi Yusuf, the phrase was common: believe in Allah and don't believe in anybody other than Him. The message of Tawheed. And this man's relationship with Quran was very, very strong. Imam Khomeini's relationship with Quran was very strong. And we see the same in Ayatollah Khomeini just now, in all his lectures. So I like to give an example. Sometimes we read chapters and we read big verses. But these ulamas have this knack of picking out threads from the Quran. They will just pick up one simple phrase and give so much meaning to their message. They've broken down the fabric of the Quran into threads, and they use those threads to give out an even bigger and a more powerful message. And these are not my words. I had an Imam of a Sunni mosque on my dental chair once. So I anesthetized him and I was talking to him. And he's a prominent Imam, although a part-timer. But he tells me that, Ayatollah Khomeini, when he lectures, when I listen to him, something happens to me. These Quranic verses that he uses, so it's this attachment that they have with the Quran. This is the first secret. Number two, they will not give up very fast. So Imam Khomeini tells the youths, don't say, I'm defeated, but say I wasn't successful. He tells the youths, don't say that I was defeated in doing something. Say I wasn't successful. He says that if no country took me, so as you know, from Iran he was exiled to Turkey and then to Iraq and then briefly to Kuwait and then back to Iraq and then to France and then he came back to Iran. He says if no country accepted me, I would go from airport to airport preaching out the message of Allah. This was Imam Khomeini. He wasn't a person who was going to give up. Persistence, steadfastness. Number three, the way he worked on his own soul, on his own nafs. And we don't see this in other leaders very often. And this is the secret of his success. He says everything else is irrelevant. Even gaining knowledge is irrelevant. That same knowledge will become a curtain on your soul. If you fail to purify your soul, tazkiyah nafs. And he would give importance to the smallest of details in his life. The smallest of details. So Ayatollah Khomeini relates this. He says, I came to meet him and I talked about somebody, a leader, and I wanted his opinion. And Ayatollah Khomeini said something negative, but then he said, I don't know much about him. A small negative sentence, and then he says, I don't know much about him. The next day, or after 2-3 days, when I went to meet him again, he says, you remember you had asked me about that person? I just want to tell you I don't know much about him. Don't even think about that sentence that I told you. And Ayatollah Khomeini says, I can't even remember that sentence. And I think it was Imam Khomeini's miracle. He had done some dua that even that phrase that he had said about that person, even that I forgot. That is how careful he was about ghibah. His daughter-in-law relates that they had two maids, two helpers in the house, and they would work in shifts. So she says, I was talking to Imam Khomeini, and one of the maids was sweeping the sitting room. And I came to Imam Khomeini, maybe not knowing that that maid was there or something, and she started praising the other maid. You know, that maid is so good. And this is not ghibah, she's praising. So Imam Khomeini is saying, stop doing ghibah. But she says, I'm not doing ghibah, I'm praising the other maid. She says, you are praising the other maid, but if this maid hears you, it will imply that she is not good. So that becomes ghibah. These are the details, minute details in his life. He would be so careful about them. The way he kept time. People would set their clocks based on Imam Khomeini's schedule. That is how punctual he was. And so many more details. You can read this in his book. Number 4 was his relationship with Imam Sahibul Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. This concept that we have of the Imam in Ghaibah, who is there waiting for our preparation so that he can come back. This relationship that Imam Khomeini had with the 12th Holy Imam. So people tell him, I think when he was in Iraq, people came and told him that you have an intention of dethroning Shah and making him leave the country. Don't you think this is wrong? This is his country. Let him stay. Why do you want to take him out of his own land? And he says, Imam Sahibul Zaman cannot be wrong when he told me to do that. Imam Sahibul Zaman cannot be wrong when he told me to take him out of this land. And so many instances that he's mentioned. And this ilmul ghaib that he had because of his purity. This was another secret. Because of the way he worked on himself. So there's another story whereby a person collected khums. At that time, Imam was in Najaf. So this person collects Sahm Imam in Iran, and he says, I'm taking it for Imam Khomeini because I know he needs it in Najaf. So after collecting so much money and maintaining so much of secrecy, Savak were very powerful. He tried to bypass every corner to maintain that secrecy. And finally he managed to come out of Iran. With difficulty he got into Iraq, and he gets to Najaf. And he goes to Imam Khomeini and tells him, I brought khums for you. This is Sahm Imam. And Imam says, I will not receive it from you. And this person is shocked. Imam, only if you knew what I went through, to gather this khums, to take it through the borders, through the security, past all these Savak agents, into Iraq and bring it here. Now you're telling me you're not going to receive it from me. He says, no. If you want, you can go and give it to the other alim. There's another Sayyid, there's another Mujtahid. Go and give it to him. He will give you a receipt. And this man doesn't understand. But he says, since I brought the khums here, he goes to the other Mujtahid, he delivers the khums, he's given a receipt. On his way back on the border, he's arrested by Savak people. And he's told, okay, we've been monitoring you for the past so and so months. You've been collecting money and you've been bypassing security checkpoints, and we know that you went to Iraq to give this money to Imam Khomeini. So we're going to arrest you. And he says, Wallahi, this man says, Wallahi, I have not given you 1 cent to Imam Khomeini, and here is the receipt. And he takes out the receipt of the other alim. So Imam Khomeini knew through the divine powers that he was granted because of his purification. So these are stories that have been mentioned. This was his strength. In Ziyarat al-Waritha, so this is number 5, Ziyarat al-Waritha, when we are addressing Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the Imams have taught us the ziyarat starts with Assalamu alayka ya waritha, the inheritor of Adam Sifatillah, Nuhin Nabiyillah, Ibrahim Khalilillah, Musa Kalimillah, Isa Ruhillah, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the warith of the Holy Prophet. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And the ulamas tell us, I quote Sheikh Murtada Lidina when he was doing a small commentary on Ziyarat al-Waritha in one of the Muharram Majalis. Okay, the reason they've been introduced this way is because the message of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was nothing but what these prophets had brought in. And they were all game changers, these prophets. And so was Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. He was also a game changer. But it was what he inherited from the previous prophets and his grandfather and his father. So the message was not different. And that's why we address them as warith. But who is the warith of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein? So allow me to say, when we want to address Imam Khomeini, he is the warith of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. Because when you see his message, the universality of his message, his purpose to bring about reform, to bring about the Islamic way of life, to reintroduce, to reignite Islamic principles, not restricted to Iran, but he was thinking beyond Iran. And now we see the effects. The effects of the Iranian Revolution. It has spread into Pakistan, we see it in Nigeria, we see it in Yemen, we see it in Palestine, we see it in Syria. We see it in South America, Venezuela, Brazil. We see it in Cuba to an extent. More importantly, we see it in Russia. That small letter that he wrote to Gorbachev in the 1980s, and he sent it through Ayatollah Jawad Amuli. At that time, it was disregarded by Gorbachev, by Boris Yeltsin. But now it has been brought back, and now we see Putin applying it to an extent. So it's the spread of this revolution, but the message of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And this is what the ulamas tell us. It's our duty to spread this message of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. This is what the purpose of Imam Khomeini was. He would say that all that we have is from Karbala. This whole thing that you see in front of us, the Iranian Revolution, the shuhada that we have given, the warriors that we have given, the blood that we have spilled, the sanctions, the difficulties that we have faced, we've learned everything from Karbala. So he's a warith of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But this is just an introduction, because the true warith is yet to come. And that is the 12th Imam, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So we are lucky to have been living in these times. For those of us who experienced it when it happened, there was a lot of excitement when I see my parents when it happened in 1979, the Iranian Revolution, but the 10 years of Imam Khomeini, and the effects that it was having, the effect that it has had on our community, the identity that it has given us as Shias, the revival of hijab, the Shiite values. But this is just an introduction. It is setting up a platform for something bigger that is yet to come. And we see it happening. We see it happening. And inshallah, this was Imam Khomeini's prediction, that my revolution will last till the reappearance of the 12th Holy Imam. This was one of his predictions. So in spite of all the difficulties that the Iranian Revolution is going through, but this man was divine, he was godly. And these are the words of not only Muslims, not only Shias, but non-Muslims themselves, they say, the researchers. This man was different. Allow me to finish with this phrase from this book of this biography of Imam Khomeini, by Qadri. Qadri, when he was given this task to compile a biography of Imam Khomeini, or to write a biography of Imam Khomeini, he says, I went to his dome where Imam Khomeini is buried, and it's a huge masjid. For those of you who have gone, the grave of Imam Khomeini, and they've really constructed it. So he says, just to get inspiration, I went to this place, and I stood there, and I saw the number of people who are coming and asking for their hajat. And different nationalities. I saw Afghanis coming, Bangladeshis coming, Pakistanis coming. I saw Europeans coming. I saw Shias, I saw Sunnis coming. But he says, I saw young men leaning on a column. There was a pillar in the mosque, and he was leaning on the column. And so Qadri is observing this man now from far. So he says this man was standing on the column looking at the grave of Imam Khomeini, and he had a piece of paper in his hand. And he would mumble something, and then he would try to write it down, and he would mumble something, and he would try to write it down. So Qadri says, I just kept on observing him for a while. And then I walked over to him, and I tried to look into his notebook as to what he had written. So initially he was shy. He didn't want to show what he had written in his book. But then he allowed me, and he was composing some poetry. So he says, when I peeped in, there was this one phrase that was written in his book. And the phrase is, if it were not for you, he's telling Imam Khomeini, if it were not for you, which column would I lean against? He's leaning on a column. He's looking at the grave of Imam Khomeini, and he's saying, if it wasn't for you, Imam Khomeini, which column would I lean on in my life? And then Qadri says, when I saw him, he didn't have his right hand. He had lost it in the war. He was a warrior. He just had his left hand, which he was writing with. But in a poetic form, he said that everything that I have in my life today, all the values that I have in my life, you are the column, Imam Khomeini. If it weren't for you, what would I lean on? So allow me to say the same thing for us. What we are today, our identity as Shias, a lot of credit goes to this man. He was truly a game changer. Iran would have been forgotten in history. It would have been just like Ecuador and Panama and all the other countries that have been exploited excessively. But this man gave a sacrifice, steadfastness, purified himself, stood up against the oppressors. We see the effects spreading around the world. And indeed, he is a column for us as Shias. What he has done is, he has just showed us the potential of this faith that we have. Most of the time we don't realize what we have in our hands. We end up using 1 or 2% of it, or using 1 or 2% of this potential that we have. But this man showed us that in our modern times, if we realize this potential that we have, exploit it, live by it, use it, stand up by it, we can move leaps and bounds in our own lives, in the lives of, in our community, progress, and the progress of our countries, just the way Iran is doing just now, the scientific research that is going on. It's become a nuclear power, it's become a military power. And very soon, with this de-dollarization that is happening, it could become an economic power also, inshallah. So we pray to Allah to bless this holy soul, Imam Khomeini. He should enable us to know more about this man, to learn things from his life, apply to our lives, improve our lives, and make us successful, inshallah, with all the imtihans that we are going to face. May we take inspiration. May he be the column that we will lean on to take us through these imtihans in our time, inshallah. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.